Hello, and welcome to That Nerd Thing, where we uncover the magical impact that fandoms have on our lives. I'm Morgan, and a few weeks ago, I realized that I was kind of missing a few topics on my podcast, and I decided to reach out on Threads to find experts in these areas, and I'm excited because today we have one of those experts on the show. So today I am chatting with Will from the Nerd Federation podcast, and it's so cool. His podcast talks about things I've actually never really gotten into, so I'm excited to kind of learn about them today. So yeah. I'm going to learn a little bit more about pro wrestling and video games. So hi, Will.
Yeah. Hey, Morgan. No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Those are very two distinct genres, I think, of entertainment. But believe it or not, there's a lot of crossover between both the fandoms.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people who play video games usually watch pro wrestling, and you get the vice versa. So much so that one of the trends that I sometimes see is if you're watching a pro wrestling show on TV, there will be somebody in the crowd with a video game related sign and asking. The big thing is Final Fantasy, if you've heard of that series.
I've heard of it.
Where yes, it's an old Japanese RPG that's been around for a long time. And basically, you'll have somebody in the crowd with a sign that says, remake Final Fantasy, whatever number, you cowards. So it's like something like that. But yeah, there's a lot of crossover between the two. And to me, it kind of made sense to do a podcast that attacked both of those forms of entertainment, two which I have a very long history with over my lifetime. So that's why it made sense to start a podcast with those things.
So what made you decide to start your podcast?
I've done other podcasts in the past,
okay,
as far as like for work. So just quick background. I used to be a journalist. I started my career as a sports writer, did that for about 4 years, and then transitioned over into what they call business journalism or trade journalism, and did that for a long time. And now I actually work on the other side and do public relations right now. But during those times, I did podcasts for work. And I really enjoyed that process of getting on a microphone like we are right now and interviewing people about different subjects. And then I thought later on, why am I not doing this on my own in some ways? Because I have the media experience just from my years as being a journalist. So it took a while because I think sometimes people always kind of think, wow, what's stopping me from doing this? Failure or not getting enough traction or the equipment or everything else, every other excuse you want to throw out into the atmosphere. And then I just sat down one day at the end of November of last year, and I thought to myself, let's just do this and see what happens. And it's slow going when you're first starting off, and you've got a few people listening here and there, but I will always tell everybody I'm very passionate about the things that I am nerdy about, and I definitely do not apologize for it. And I think that comes through on the podcast, and hopefully it comes through while we're talking here.
Oh, I definitely think it will. And you're so right. And that's so important, I think, especially with podcasting, to make sure it's something that you would love talking about, even if nobody listens. Otherwise, it's not as rewarding.
Yeah, you got to entertain yourself sometimes. I mean, especially in the beginning. But it is kind of good practice for me as somebody who deals with media and tries to stay sharp as far as speaking and things of that nature. And I feel as though this podcast and coming onto other podcasts kind of helps with that. I'm used to doing the interviewing. So the fact that I'm sitting here with you, I'm on the other side of the table, I have to say it's a little weird, but I know it'll be fun. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah. Are you ready to jump into your nerdy identity?
Yeah, let's do it.
What is the first thing that you were nerdy about?
I think it was video games. And I was thinking about this before we came on because I don't have great memories of early childhood. I don't know who does. I like to meet that person if you're out there. But I distinctly remember when I was growing up, and we're talking about early 80s, and there was, if you're familiar or unfamiliar, I can explain a little bit. It's a system called the Atari 2600. very old. They don't even Atari exists now more as like a publisher of games, but they don't have like their own system like a Nintendo or a PlayStation or an Xbox. So you have to imagine, think about the technology we have now and what something like Pac-Man used to look like back in the early 80s. Very pixelated, very slow. But I always remember this Atari was in our dining room. We had a television in the dining room. So where every Saturday morning, my sister and I would go watch Saturday morning cartoons. I'm dating myself now because you don't really have Saturday morning cartoons anymore. But I always remember that Atari was there.
Yeah.
It was always there because it was my dad's. He was the one that kind of got me into this nerdy journey as far as liking video games. So he had the Atari. It eventually became ours. And then going forward, we actually got another old system. It was the Commodore 64. It was an old PC, basically. You know, these clunky PCs that you see from the early 80s and even into the 90s. I played so many games on that thing. Oregon Trail was a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know listeners are going to hear that and relate.
Yeah, Oregon Trail was a huge thing. Space Invaders is another thing from the early 80s. Galaga. You'll find out here, I'm a huge I have a lot of nostalgia for the old arcade games, like the old arcades in general. But it's funny because we were on that Commodore for a long time. Even when other people got like Nintendos and other systems, I was playing games on the Commodore and then eventually got myself a more updated computer and was playing video games on that. So a lot of it was early PC gaming, which is funny because I don't game on PC anymore. This is not my thing because I find it very complicated, but back then, I think it was a little bit simpler, and it enabled me as, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old and into early teens to get into playing a lot of different type of things. Carmen Sandiego.
Oh, yeah.
That was a huge thing. Huge. Even though it was dual purpose, right? It was educational because they went over your geography and world geography and U.S. geography. And then it was kind of a mysterious, where is this woman? Where is she hiding in the world? Those educational games, I feel, were a staple back then because they were fun.
Those were
They were actually fun.
Yeah,
they were.
I remember, I can't remember what it was, but I remember there was like a campaign with cereals, and you would get like a cereal box and it would have a CD-ROM of a game. And I remember like Carmen Sandiego was one of the games. I can't remember the others, but it was so fun.
That is it. Wow, I think I missed a boat on that. CD-ROMs inside cereals.
Yeah.
Jeez, the prizes that they used to put inside of a cereal box back in the day, it's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Have you read or seen the movie Ready Player One?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Have you read the book, though?
I have. I love it.
Okay.
I read both of them.
Yes, same here. And the funny thing about Ready Player One, both the book and the movie, obviously they changed stuff in the movie, right? But I don't know if you remember, there's a game called Adventure that they play in the book. I think it's one of the first tasks, one or two of the first tasks that he has to do. I forget what Percival, right? Is that what his name is? And it's based on an old Atari game. So when I was reading the book, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that this game is in this book. And that just triggered so many things in my mind. I mean, that whole book did, let's be honest, because it's so much 80s and 90s nostalgia.
I love that book, yeah.
Yeah. It just triggered so many things. And I'm like, I can't believe that they have Adventure, that this game Adventure is in this book. I'm disappointed that did not make it into the movie. Because if you remember in the movie, he had to do the car race in the movie. Was the first thing that they did, was the first task. So they changed it. I get it. Car racing's probably a little bit more fun as a movie device. But Ready Player One is definitely, it's up there as far as all-time favorite books of mine, for sure.
Yeah, I love that book. What is your favorite nerdy thing?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because I think right now it's fighting between video games and pro wrestling. It's kind of butting heads.
Okay, they're both your favorite.
Yeah, they're both the favorite. It's funny because somebody was asking me not too long ago what I do more of. Do I watch more pro wrestling or do I play more video games? And I got to say, I watch a little bit more pro wrestling because it's easier just to kind of sit down and watch something versus taking time out to play something, if that makes sense, because you want to sit down for a nice like gaming session, maybe of like 2 hours, 3 hours. I can't go more than that. I just can't. Then I start feeling bad about myself. Like, what am I doing? I can't be sitting here for 3 to 4 hours doing this. But the thing is, the great thing about technology and like DVRs is I can watch 15 minutes of a wrestling match, stop it, go do something else, and then come back later on and finish it off. So I think in that way, maybe the pro wrestling is something a little bit more right now, but they're up there. I think that they're tied in my mind for number one. And then there's sometimes sports kind of butts in as well. And as if people can see behind me, if they do see, I mean, this is me.
Yeah, I love it.
Their nerdiness is, I mean, this is who I am. And I know there's a question later on about that, but yeah, it's just something I'll never deny myself to let myself be a nerd, even in my mid 40s, because that doesn't expire.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah, it doesn't expire. Liking things doesn't expire. Being a nerd about things doesn't expire. And I don't think anybody should be ashamed to hide some of that stuff. I used to. I did that at times, and I had to be like, this is this is
who you
part
are.
of who I am. Why would I ever deny myself or anybody else that? It's just, yeah, it's kind of crazy. We'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah, it's something I think people should think about going forward.
Yeah.
Don't be ashamed.
I love your display. So everybody who is listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, definitely go check out the video on YouTube or some of the social media clips, because Will has like a really cool background, and I see a Dwight up there, which I love.
Yes. Yes, Dwight. I love The Office. Big Office fan.
Too.
And for the audio listeners, I'll kind of go through some things. There's Star Wars. Everything that I'm really nerdy about is up here, I think. Star Wars. There's Batman. I love Batman. I love comic books. I have an old, when they tried to kill Superman the first time back in like the 90s, and DC made a ton of money off of that whole thing. I've got little wrestling figures splattered all over these shelves. There are books. There's the woman from the Netflix series about the chess. What's her name? I can't remember her name now. I have to look behind me. Oh, yes, Beth Harmon from the chess show on Netflix. It was based on a book.
Queen's Gambit?
I can't remember. Yes, there you go. I loved it.
Yeah, that was a good show.
Great. That show is phenomenal.
Yeah, it was good.
Probably one of the best shows I've ever watched in my life. And I had to get her, the bobblehead up there is her in the final. Remember when she comes to the final thing against the guy in the white?
Yeah. Oh,
so
yeah.
So that's the bobblehead is her in the white. Yeah, it's great. It's a great bobblehead. I forget where I got it from, but I should say a pop figure, not a bobblehead. But yeah, there's all sorts of stuff behind me. Harry Potter, He-Man. Back in the day, there's a figure there for a character from a video game called Horizon. Her name is Aloy.
Cool.
Another one of my favorite characters. Yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah, I need to get a display behind me, but I'm so like indecisive. I want to get it just right.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough. I get it. It took me a while to come up with what I have behind me, and I'm always tinkering with it because that's just what I do.
Yeah. What are you currently nerdy about?
That's a great question. It was something that I was thinking about before here. I am watching House of Dragons right now. And this is the first season because I missed out on season 1 the first time around. And I love Game of Thrones. So I am now trying to get caught up on that hoopla because my girlfriend wants to watch season 2. And she said, oh, wait, I'll let you watch season 1 and then we can watch season 2 together. So I try to watch as many of these series that are out there and try to make a conscious effort to do so. You've got House of Dragons. I'm going through Cobra Kai right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm really nerdy about that because, again, nostalgia, Karate Kid, the 80s. Watching that show is a trip for me because it just brings back all these different things that were going on in my life when Karate Kid was like a thing. So, yeah, I would say those are the two big things right now. There's just a lot of content out there.
I know, it's so hard to keep up with it all.
And I know you're into Bridgerton because I've seen the clips on, and my girlfriend watches that, so I'm aware of it. But it's just like I don't know how crazy people. It's amazing to me. How do you prioritize what you watch or what you do or what you play? Because I'm thinking every day when I'm done with work, there are so many different things that I can do. I can go watch a movie. I can go watch a show. I can go play a video game. I can go watch a match from Japan that I've been meaning to watch for like weeks. The amount of content that is raining down on us on a daily basis.
I know, it's so much.
It makes it hard to, and the thing is, I think as nerds, it makes it more difficult because we want to watch it all.
Yeah, we definitely do.
We don't want to miss out. There's, I haven't even like watched The Acolyte yet. It's like Star Wars is like one of my favorite things, and I haven't sat down properly to watch it because I've been so into the whole House of Dragon things. I'm like, no. I can't watch 3 different shows at once. I'm just not going to get the full effect of it. So yeah, it's tough, but I think the biggest thing is right now is trying to get through House of Dragons and get myself situated with that so I can watch season 2.
Yeah, and so you don't get spoiled.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too. Every time something comes on, I'm like, I can't watch this. And like the posters, I don't want to know who that is. I try to like look away immediately as soon as possible. So I'm halfway through the first season. So I'm almost there. I'm probably gonna do, when we're done here, probably watch a couple of episodes and get myself closer to watching season 2.
So maybe it's a good thing that I'm not really a gamer because I wouldn't be able to keep up with everything. I can't I would be adding more things to my list.
It's tough. No, it really is because, and the problem now, you could look at it 2 ways as a gamer. The problem now is that games are getting so long to where you're talking about, I'll give you a perfect example. I just played a game. It's called Stellar Blade. It's on the PlayStation 5 and it's basically, for those who might be aware, it's an action game. It's a woman with a sword, basically. You're going around killing like these alien type of things. It took me 40 hours to get through. It's a lot.
Wow.
It's a lot. And the games are getting longer and longer to where back in the day, you were talking about maybe 8 to 10 hours that you were spending on a video game. And now you're looking at 30, 40, 50. There are things, it's the funny thing is my brother plays a lot more than I do. And I sit there in awe and I'm like, how do you're spending 120 hours. And he's married, by the way. So it's not like, and he does things with his wife. It's not like he's not being a dad and a husband, but he somehow finds a way to play 100-hour game. I'm like, I'm very jealous of him, by the way. So if he listens to this, he'll know how jealous I am by how much gaming he does more than I do.
We need time machines to be able to do it all.
Oh God, we really do. I think the one thing that you have to take away is that you're never gonna catch up in a way, and you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with some of the FOMO and the fact that there's a series or a show or a movie or a game that you're never gonna watch, because you're never going to have the time for it.
Right. And there's always going to be something new. There's always going to be something new.
That's always the big thing with gamers, is that we have the thing called the backlog, which is, you could be universal, because I'm sure you have a backlog of shows that you haven't gone through. Yeah.
Oh my God. And books. It's so much.
That's another thing too, because I love to read as well. It's like, how do I fit all this in? But like from a gamer perspective, that's always been the struggle. Here are all these games that I have in my backlog, maybe 20 of them, but yet every couple of weeks there's something else coming out. And that never used to be the case back in the day. It was basically you got one big game per quarter every 3 months, and that was it. Now you're getting a blockbuster every couple of weeks. And it's hard for us to keep up, for gamers to keep up from a time perspective, from a money perspective. This hobby's not cheap. Yeah, it's not a cheap thing.
Yeah, games are expensive.
They're expensive. You're talking about $60 to $70 a pop. You're talking about systems that run you $500-$600. And that's not even looking at the PC market, where if you spend money on a rig, as they call them, you're spending $2,000, $2,500 on a rig that does everything to play the game, so you can see like the beads of sweat coming down their nose because people are so into graphics. So it's an expense. That's one thing too. It's an expensive hobby, but thankfully there's always a sale. Something's always on sale from a game perspective, and you can pick up a game that was $70 in February is now like $25 in June. So there's there's pros and cons to the whole thing.
Yeah, I always love a good deal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
What is the most underrated nerdy thing about you?
I'm into like earthquakes and volcanoes for some reason.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Listen, I will preface this by saying those are two terrible things from a natural disaster perspective, okay? However, as somebody who was really into earth science as a kid and in school, I've always had like this thing about earthquakes and volcanoes because I don't know, there's just something about it that I found fascinating, that the earth trembles in a way. And we got a taste of that up here a couple of months ago where there was a 4.2 earthquake in New Jersey. So I'm in upstate New York. It was a 4.2 earthquake in New Jersey. And you felt it here. It got as far east as Boston and as far south as I think as Virginia. I probably spent an hour reading everything that I could about where the epicenter was. There were some aftershocks. I was reading firsthand accounts of people's, stuff was coming off the walls and nothing, thankfully nothing happened here. But I don't know, I'm so fascinated by stuff like that because there's so much about the earth we don't really know and like what causes certain things. And when you think about earthquakes, you think West Coast, right? You think California.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. I'm like, I didn't even know New York had earthquakes. I was like, what?
There are fault lines in the city. Actually, in New York City, there's a major fault line that this is getting really nerdy now. Not many people know this, but there is a train line that goes on the west side of Manhattan that it eventually crosses over into the borough of the Bronx, which is just north of Manhattan. And the train comes outside for a little bit and then goes back into the tunnel. The reason why it does that is because there's a fault line right there. So they had to build the tunnel over the fault line in case something crazy happened and it was activated and God forbid there's an earthquake while subway's going right over the fault line. Really fast. And I found that out like 20 years ago. And that's something that's always stuck in my mind that, yeah, you think California? Yeah, okay. But there's stuff in New Jersey. There's stuff in the West, in the East Coast, in the mountains. It's a really fascinating topic. So
that is fascinating.
Yeah, very nerdy about that type of thing.
That is cool. I love looking up stuff about the ocean. That's always so fascinating to me because it's so mysterious.
It is. It's like I remember reading books when I was a kid about like, in some ways, they always call space like the last frontier. But a lot of people think the ocean is the last frontier in some ways because it really hasn't been explored, especially when you look at trenches that go down thousands of miles into the bedrock or whatever it's called. There are creatures down there that never see the light of day, which I think is just, it's crazy to me to think that those things exist. So yeah, that's a good one. Ocean stuff is a very nerdy thing to be nerdy about, for lack of a better term.
It's just so interesting. And you're right, the earth and just like all the natural stuff that could happen. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. Thankfully, no volcanoes in the East Coast. At least well, let me take that back. I think Mount Washington is in New Hampshire. And I used to live in the Boston area. And so I know that's a thing. And obviously you've got Mount Helena. I'm probably butchering that. Sorry, anybody living in Washington State. I know that's a big one over there in like the Seattle area. But yeah, it's another fascinating thing. It's scary too. I mean, they've made movies off of that, off of those type of things. So yeah, it's anything weather related, anything like earth science related, space related. I am very UFOs. I mean, I can't get enough of that type of stuff. I find all of that just so fascinating to me. It's just, I love it. I think it comes from my dad. He was very nerdy about those type of things as well. So I think he definitely passed that down to me.
I was walking my dog a few weeks ago and I saw like these orange lights in the sky. It was at night and I was like, what is going on? Because it was like going in and out. And I'm like, am I seeing a UFO? Yeah. And I'm like texting everybody and then like,
I love that.
It disappeared. It just like popped and went away.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, you never know.
You never know.
I feel like I've seen, so the part of New York I live in, it's like in the mid-Hudson Valley. So it's away from the city. So it's away from the city lights. And sometimes I'll look up and just think, the night is so clear. Let me see if I can see something crazy, something crazy and strange, because you always hear about when there's a sighting, it's usually in an area where there's not a lot of city lights. So you get a very clear perspective of the city sky. So I'm constantly looking up at night and just kind of seeing, hey, who knows, see something, at least see a shooting star or something like that. It's fun. Again, the nerdy stuff. This is what this is all about, right? These are like the little these are like the little nerdy things in between the bigger nerdy things that I like to like geek out about.
Exactly, because being a nerd is part of your identity.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what it is, for sure.
What is the most random nerdy thing about you?
This was also a question I was thinking about today, and I'm going to try to keep it as high level as possible because it's really in the weeds. But like I said before, I used to be a reporter. And I used to cover the banking industry. Very boring when you think about it. Not a lot of stuff, when you're writing about like Bank of America and Citibank and stuff like that. But I will say there is the financial technology perspective of it that I find fascinating because, and I'll give you a great example. When you take your debit card or credit card and pop it into that machine, the chip into the machine or tap it on the screen there, you have no idea. There are like 15 million things happening in the background that happen in an instant because you'll never know, right? Because a common, like everyday person is just not going to know how that system works.
Yeah.
But I had to write about that stuff for years. And I'm always fascinated by how everything that goes into making those purchases, you would wonder, how does this even how are there no mistakes along the way? That's like a big thing that I get geeked out about, like talking about like Apple Pay or PayPal or how the mechanisms of that work. And if you remember the way we went from swiping the card to putting the chip in.
Yes.
And how much of a disaster that was for people.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I had to do like 10 times.
Yes.
And then you finally swipe it.
Exactly. I would just sit back at a store and just watch people struggle with it. Now, not that I was mocking them, but it was the fact that I don't think our banks did a good enough job explaining how this was going to work, really at all. So yeah, it's stuff like that I get really nerdy about, and people don't really hear about it except for the people at my job, because I work for a public relations firm that deals with like fintechs and financial technology companies. So that comes up all the time, and I can get really in the weeds about that type of stuff. But it's fascinating because it's everyday life. Yeah. It's everyday life when you order your coffee ahead of time and there are a million things happening in the background and you're wondering, how did I get the money out of my bank account and make sure it goes to the proper place, Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or whatever? A lot happens in the background. So yeah, that's definitely a very underrated, unknown type of thing as far as nerdiness is concerned.
Yeah, your nerdiness has such a range. So we have
it does. Yeah, it's crazy.
The earth, video games, reading, TV shows, wrestling, financial technology. That's super cool.
It's all over the place. Yeah, it is all over the place. I like to tell people I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I also can kind of take a deep dive into, I don't know, 4 to 5 things depending on the day or the time of the day.
So let's talk about your journey into nerdiness and fandom. Like I'm curious, especially, what is it that you love particularly about like pro wrestling and video games, like that you made a podcast about it?
Yeah. There's an emotional connection, I think, with a lot of these things from a perspective of, I love good storytelling. Let me start it. Let me start there with that. I love to be told good stories. I love to consume good stories. You find a lot of that in pro wrestling, believe it or not. You find a lot of that in video games. I like playing games that are more story driven because I get a great satisfaction into escaping into a world.
Yeah.
And there's emotions that go with that. There are highs and lows. You get invested with characters, whether it's a video game or even pro wrestling. I was just talking to somebody recently about how this one wrestler debuted surprisingly out of nowhere, and people knew who he was because he has a very catchy theme song. And when you watch the replay, and you can enjoy this reaction not knowing anything about this person or wrestling or anything. I could see his eyes were getting glazed over because he was shocked at the reaction of the crowd when he came out of that tunnel.
Yeah.
I love that type of stuff. Like, I love seeing the human element of that aspect of storytelling, that you can make such a connection to somebody that you're showing the emotion, and in turn, I'm showing the emotion. There have been times where I've been to wrestling events, and I'm not ashamed to to admit this, but I've had to hold back like tears in some ways, because you get, and that's the whole point. They want you to get emotionally invested like that, because they want you coming back again and again and again to pay for whatever the event or to pay for the game. And it happens across a lot of things. It happens across video games and books and movies and TV shows. And listen, I think that's like the great thing about that is just like the storytelling aspect of it, and being so emotionally invested that it actually does produce an emotion in you and show that you're not a human being, and I mean that you are a human being and you're not a robot.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
So the core for all of these things for you is the story and what it means in terms
it
of
is.
Even just being human, like that human element.
It is. And it's also, believe it or not, a jealousy thing. And I'll explain that, because when I was growing up, I was always told, Will, you're going to make your money writing. So I'm like, okay. And I did. I was a journalist. I was a sports writer. I actually had the dream job. It was the thing when I was in high school. I wanted to go into sports writing. And I did that. And I told emotional stories at times. There are, human interest stories that are to be told in those fields. So I'm jealous from the perspective of, gosh, I wish I was good enough to think about, like, from a creative perspective, to think about, oh, I wish I would have had that idea for a video game or a book or a show or even a storyline in a pro
totally
wrestling
get that.
show.
Yeah.
It's just like there's something I think for all creatives, we have an appreciation for the arts in many ways, and we find our different ways to connect with those. And like you said, I think the storytelling element is something that I take deep dives into and really consume myself with and get into what's being presented. But I'll tell you, if it's a bad story, I can spot one a mile away. And I think as people like us who watch a lot of content, we can see that.
Yeah.
I might not say anything about it publicly, because I'm a big believer in not. If you see something that's bad, just kind of move on. It doesn't really need to like disparage it because somebody did kind of work hard. And I know that's kind of difficult as like critics, and maybe there is like constructive criticism there, but there's no reason to go into like insults.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that person is way smarter than me because they created that type of thing. So yeah, it's definitely the storytelling thing and just being emotionally invested in these things.
I totally get what you're saying though. Like I always say in another life, I would have loved to be a Broadway performer, like the one to create. I don't have any of the skills, but
yeah. That's another area I find so fascinating. I love my Broadway shows. I don't go to a lot of them, but I've been to many Disney ones, which is kind of funny.
What's your favorite?
In some ways. I've seen Aladdin and The Little Mermaid and Lion King. I would say The Little Mermaid, and here's why. When I was, my brother, who I spoke about earlier, he memorized that Under the Sea song when he was very, very small. And I just remember it triggers something. That song triggers something in my brain, the memories of him being, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years old, and him being in a playpen with his hands on the bar and looking over the top of it and singing the song. Not coherently, I might add, but he knew enough of the words to really get into it. So I think that's probably why that Little Mermaid Broadway play, I'm not even sure if it's around anymore, but that was kind of why that was always my favorite one. But the production values and stuff in those things are amazing.
Yeah.
For anybody who's ever seen the Harry Potter one, they do some stuff in that Harry Potter play that will blow your mind, because it's happening in front of you. There's no timeout. There's no cut. We need to change the thing, and it's.
I heard it's amazing. Yeah, I heard it's just like so magical.
It really is. I highly recommend, if you have a chance, to go see that, because just from the production value alone, it is off the charts, like great. And I don't know if I'm sure there are other things out there like it, but because you have to basically recreate magic on a Broadway stage, kudos to those people who come up with that because that stuff is very creative. I will say.
Yeah. So again, for you, it's just so much about that story and that connection.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I get upset at myself because I don't read as many books as I used to, and I think to me that's like the ultimate kind of in storytelling, because there's a lot that can be done. And we talked about Ready Player One and how different how different the movie is from the book, and how I wished that they had some of the elements from the book, because I think you miss a lot in some ways when you have that translation. And I get that always happens. And obviously reading Ready Player 2 wasn't as good as the first one, but it's okay. But yeah, it's getting lost in those worlds and really honing in on the themes and just getting emotionally invested. I think it's good to explore those things about yourself, and don't be ashamed of it.
Yeah.
Really, just don't. Embrace it all.
What is it like for you that you've now created this podcast about something that you love?
It's been interesting because I've got to pay attention more.
You got to keep up.
I mean? Like I got to keep up, which is really tough, especially when you have a full-time job and a stressful one at that. And balancing girlfriend and family and other obligations, it's very tough to kind of to balance all that stuff. And there are times, quite frankly, and I'm sure maybe you can relate to this, sometimes when you sit down behind that mic, you don't want to do this. You're just like, I can't, I don't have the energy to do it. But then you press play and you kind of get into character.
Yeah. For me, this is my favorite part of doing the podcast. The part for me that is exhausting is the editing.
Oh, yes. I completely agree.
Yeah. It takes me way too long.
I totally get that. But yeah, you have to kind of get into character after a long day. And that part of it is tough, but I have to give, I feel as though I have to gift the gab. So I can kind of go on and on and on about something. Sometimes I'll look at how long I've been recording and think to myself, how did I just go 45 minutes nonstop talking about pro wrestling? How's that even possible?
Because you love it and you're passionate about it.
Yes,
that's amazing.
Exactly.
And I think people will hear that. And that's what people will gravitate towards.
Yeah. And I've had people say it. I've had people who've listened to it and tell me, well, you're really passionate about the things you talk about. It's just like, yeah, because I'm being real about it. Just something. There are things that are near and dear to my heart. So why be fake about it?
Exactly.
Just go all out. So yeah.
Is there anything else about your journey that you want to share?
I would say embrace everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we touched upon that earlier, because I think some people are under the impression that you need to let go of certain things at a certain age. And I am here to tell you, absolutely not.
Love it.
Yes, just embrace what you embrace. And if somebody disparages it, that's fine. I'll give you a quick example. I love going to, when I'm in a Walmart or Target, my legs just automatically go over to the video game section, even though I don't buy anything because we've become so digital. But there is still the physical games over there. They're behind the glass. And I don't know. It's a habit. I just like to look. It's just a thing that I've done all my life. And there was one occasion where there was somebody walking in the aisle with his wife, girlfriend, partner. I don't know. They were together, clearly together. And I don't know if she was looking for something for a sibling or a kid or a nephew, a niece or whatever. And the guy was like, oh, I don't understand why people waste their time on video games. And I heard him. I clearly heard him. And I had to hold myself from saying something, because you just have to do that in those situations. Yeah. But you come away from those things to where, first of all, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care that you think it's dumb or it's a waste of time. I don't understand why people are always so concerned about what other people do with their free time. I'm never going to understand that. Never. Oh, I will never understand that. But that's kind of stuff emboldens me in some way to even be more nerdy. Yeah, that guy's never going to see it. That guy's never going to listen to this episode of this podcast or any of my podcasts that I do. But it just kind of makes me want to embrace what I love more. And I think it was, I would say in my early 30s where I finally thought to myself, I got to stop hiding some of this stuff that I love pro wrestling the way I do, that I play video games the way I do. Just like embrace it. It's part of my personality. Why would you ever hide a part of your personality? That's another thing to take away. Don't hide it.
Exactly.
Just really do not hide it. Just embrace it.
Be who you are. So for you, what does being a nerd mean for you?
I think it just kind of means being open to different experiences in a way, and having passion about the things that you love, and looking at the world just a little bit differently. Listen, I watch pro wrestling, okay? They don't call it soap opera for men for no reason.
I didn't know they call it that. I love that.
Oh, yeah. It was a thing back in, like, I would say the 90s. They would say, oh, pro wrestling is just soap opera for men. It really is, because it's just, listen, there's a bunch of people running around their underwear, basically, and staged combat and ridiculous storylines, and they pull in different like aspects of supernatural stuff and sci-fi and all that. Really, it really is one of the greatest forms of entertainment, I think, in the world. Yeah, you kind of have to, embrace all that and open up your mind. I think opening up my mind to pro wrestling and sometimes the ridiculousness in that, it opens up my mind until something that I'll see that's nerdy and think to myself, oh, I don't think that'll be for me. But let me just put that in the back of my mind, and maybe I'll revisit it later. And then you revisit it later and you're like, oh, this is actually pretty good. Yeah. So I would say it enables me to kind of embrace the weird.
Yes.
It enables me, to be passionate about things and leave yourself open to different possibilities, because you never know. You never know what's going to be your next nerdy passion.
Yeah, you never know. And then you will come back for a part 2 episode and we'll find out what your new nerdy passions are.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely be up for that for sure.
So let's get into our geeky recommendations to help people embrace their nerdiness. Usually I'll plan before I record, and then sometimes I'm like, let me see what comes to me during recording. So today, I want to recommend for everybody to check out the book Ready Player One by Ernest Cline.
Yes,
it is so good. Yeah, especially if you're somebody who's really into like 80s and 90s nostalgia, and it's so much fun. You don't have to be a gamer to enjoy it.
Right.
It's a really, really fun and quick read. Highly recommend it. I mean, it was good enough that they made a movie out of it, so definitely check it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. My recommendation, it just came to me. There was a movie a few years back called The Wrestler.
Okay.
It was with Mickey Rourke, okay? This was when Mickey Rourke was like trying to revive his career in the movie industry. And for those who are unfamiliar or might not know, that role in The Wrestler helped Mickey Rourke come back into the mainstream. And then he was a villain in one of the Iron Man movies. Like that was a direct line because of how he was reviving his career.
Cool.
So, yeah, I would say if you want to get a little bit of insight into pro wrestling, and you don't even really need to be a wrestling fan, because again, it goes into the human element of what people will put their bodies through to entertain other people. And it is
that's fascinating.
Insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And the thing is that there was a lot of controversy when it came out from the aspect of it got behind the scenes a little bit too much as far as how things are put together. Guys, it's fake. It's scripted. We all know that. But I shouldn't say fake, because people don't like that when you in pro wrestling. It's predetermined. Okay, let's put it that way. It's scripted. Don't ever say that's a wrestling fan that it's fake. Just FYI. But they went behind the scenes. They showed the guys in the back talking about the match. I'm going to do this. Then you're going to do that. Like that actually happens. So there was a little bit of controversy about that back then, because that was still very taboo.
Oh, to know
now
that.
It's more. Yeah, now it's more in the open, because we all know it's a show. It's the same thing as Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing as Bridgerton. It's a show. It's scripted. That's just, it's entertainment. So but that movie does a really good job of, it shows you the different levels of pro wrestling as far as these smaller shows and then bigger and bigger. And then the wrestler guy, he's working at a deli counter because he has to have a day job,
right.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who work on these lower level independents, they call them, these like local things that you go to in like a high school gym, those people have like day jobs, and then they do this stuff on the weekend. Not everybody's going to make it to like WWE, like the high thing, or an AEW. That's just not the way it works. So highly recommend, if you want to get a little taste into the backgrounds of like pro wrestlers and that world, highly recommend watching The Wrestler. I think it's a good one.
Cool. That sounds like a good recommendation.
It is. I think so.
I would say I'll add it to my list, but so this week I had an episode come out where my niece interviewed me, and she's like, "Do you really put these things on your list?" And so I feel called out. So I'm like, it'll be on my mind if I have time.
Right. Yeah. I saw the clip of that one. Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that.
No, but that does sound good though. And I'm somebody who's always fascinated in the behind the scenes of how things work. So that's kind of cool.
I love it. And some people don't like that, but to me, the way I look at it, the more I know about how the sausage is made, the more I enjoy the way it all comes together.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, because listen, video games it's magic in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The way everything comes together on the screen, and you just have no idea. Like this, it's a very stressful job, and it's the same thing with a lot of these pro wrestlers and the way they kind of like go about their lives. It's a lot of hard work. So the more I know about the way that comes together, I feel like the more I appreciate that stuff.
Totally. Well, Will, thank you so much for being here today. This was a lot of fun, and you definitely...
Oh, this was great.
And you opened my mind to, like, I never really thought about wrestling before, but now I think I'm going to look at it in a different way.
I think you should.
Yeah.
I think you should. It has a little bit of everything.
I know. When you compared it to Bridgerton, I was like, oh, how similar. So where can people find you on your podcast?
I would say just do a search for the Nerd Federation podcast, and it should come up. I'm on Threads. I am on Instagram. I'm on X, for better or worse. It's on Apple Podcasts. It's on Spotify. It's on YouTube. It's all over the place. So give it a follow if people are interested, and you might learn something. You know, who knows?
Yeah, definitely. And I'll include links to all of that in the show notes. So definitely go check that out and give Will a follow, because I am all about supporting people following their passions, and you could clearly tell, Will, that you're so passionate about it. So I think people will really enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, please make sure that you are following the show in your favorite podcast app so that you never miss an episode. If you can, I would really appreciate it to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And if you are watching this episode on YouTube, to subscribe and like this video. You can follow the show on Instagram and TikTok at thatnerdthingpod, and you can reach out to me with all of your thoughts at thatnerdthingpod@gmail.com. And please be sure to share this episode with all of your nerdy friends and your friends who really appreciate a good story. And I will see you next time.